The U.S. has officially declared today a federal holiday. That's June the 19th. Juneteenth, as it will be known, marks the anniversary of the first slaves being told they were free in 1865. To speak more on the significance of this, we're joined by advocate Sipho Mantula, a researcher at Unisa's Thabo Mbeki African School on Public and International Affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Mantula, for joining us. So the emancipation of slaves on June the 19th, 1865. How's the day gaining traction and support in the US before we come to the significance for South Africans and Africans?
Thank you very much, my sister. Good afternoon and Jumbo Africa to the viewers. A very important, significant day today, marking 156 years. I think if you will look back, the slave ships, the slave trade, the slavery practice that was used in the United States affected Africans who were shipped into that country. Now, during the era of George Floyd last year, you will remember that the issue of the Black Lives Matter, the human dignity of Africans came into the fore. Hence, there have been this agitation. But let us remind viewers, Barack Obama as well, during his term, he kept on raising June 19 as another form of looking at the dignity of Africans, how they were treated, mistreated, ill-treated, and as well as one of the key issues that we will say, it was a dehumanization of the black souls and the black spirit. And that's where it is critical when we look back at this day that even if it has been signed into the law, later in the 19th century, it's only the United Nations framework looked at the issues of slavery and the slave practice. And these are the issues that countries like the US, they are going through what we are calling great moments of pain that they must face, and they must close that chapter because that chapter was never closed. It was only during the time of the then President Abraham Lincoln, who worked on it in 1863, before 1865 was as well being known as the Juneteenth. As you have said, it was Freedom Day, it was Jubilee Day, it was Emancipation Day, but this is a very critical day that ties this bond between Africa and the African diaspora.
It's been more than 150 years since the abolition of slavery in the US, yet relations there are still an absolute mess. And as you've alluded to, that's because of a lack of transformation. How do we put the transformation agenda at the forefront of global politics, and that amidst the framing of this COVID-19 pandemic that seems to have overtaken all of our discussions?
No, correctly, but COVID actually unmasked the racism, the evil of racism that are in the superpowers. The holding of the vaccine in itself shows that the lives of the Africans doesn't matter. Hence, if you look at the global politics of this issue, of why this day it is very relevant and why in Africa we should be concerned about the racism that has been practiced in the so-called superpowers and the great nations. There is no nation that can be great on the back foot of colonizing, enslaving Africans. And as you are saying, how do we move towards transformation? It is a total eradication of racism, of poverty, and of civil war. But there is mental slavery that we should deal with, because the issues of physical slavery were around the issues of torture. But when you look at the mindset, the mental blockage that we see coming from USA, coming from China, coming from Russia, coming from France, undermining Africans who, by the way, I've said they were shipped. There was a slave ship, there was a trade. People were used as commodities, and we should never allow it to happen. So transformation, as President Biden yesterday said, it was critical for them not to walk away from ignorance and to walk away from that reality of enslavement or maafa, as we will say, because slavery, in some instance, it is enslavement of a slave and the slave master.
Has it significant is it, do you think, that so long after the fact this day has now been declared a federal holiday? What message does the Biden-Harris administration send globally by making this proclamation now?
One will say that working with Kamala Harris, they are trying to do what Trump has been doing in terms of promoting racism and white supremacy in that country. One will say that even if it is named as a symbolic acknowledgement of the end of slavery, one will say that it is critical for them to look at the race relations. It is critical for them to undergo what in most of our African countries we have went through, transitional justice system, so that they deal with racism, they deal with corruption in that country as well. And if even the critical issue that I will say, it is that it links with the African continent, that Africa as well have been facing slavery that came from the Arabs, slavery that came from their own leaders, and the slavery that I have just alluded coming from the U.S. as the so-called great nation. So it is very critical for us to understand that history, it will always be remembered by the survivors. And our history and our narratives should not be defined by the slave master. And hence, even on our curriculum, on the media, it should be constantly be a reminder to the present generation. Because what happened in 1865, it has triggered what we see in the global body politics of racism, of health inequality, as well as of terrorism in the world.